Thank you, Chair Moore, and let me add my thanks to yours for all of the thoughtful testimony that we received this morning. First, I want to acknowledge events in the Pacific as we monitor the latest developments in Tonga following the deadly volcanic explosion and tsunami. We need to note the special connection between Hawaii and our sister islands of Oceania. Facts about the impacts have been severely limited due to the disruption of telecommunications to, from, and within the islands of Tonga. And as a result, many family and loved ones within our ʻohana and throughout Hawaii remain unable to connect with their Tongan ʻohana and verify their safety. So we express our deepest heartfelt compassion and aloha to all in Tonga, in Hawaii and beyond who have been touched by this tragedy. And we hope that communications can be restored and people can receive positive news from those that they love there. To the posted items, let me start with a little bit about COVID. This week, we made an announcement that I think all of you have seen to defer for 1 week only our return to the planned mode of instruction in person for classes across the system. This happened to be the day of the highest case count in our history, but we had set Tuesday as the day on which we knew we needed to make a decision for the benefit of our students and their families to plan, especially those who may not be on the island of their campus. And to be clear, we thought it was the best decision given everything that we can understand about the pace of this pandemic, but we are not planning to revisit this again. So we do expect to resume the announced mode of instruction for all of our classes, including all of our in-person classes, on January 31st. Our case counts are up on our campuses. That should be no surprise. Our campuses are embedded within the communities of our islands. In general, we're dealing well with it, as is the case in the community. Most of the cases are not severe. It is a lot of work, I will say, for our student housing administrators in particular at UH Hilo and at UH Manoa, managing issues around quarantine and isolation as necessary. Just a couple of other changes. We are looking at moving our vaccination requirement from what is currently called full vaccination, that is having 2 shots of Moderna or Pfizer or 1 shot of the J&J vaccine, and moving that to include a booster. And this is consistent with what we now hear brewing at both the state and the counties. The terminology, for your information, is instead of saying fully vaccinated, you will start to see the terminology up to date with your vaccination. And that is the way, in general, the community is beginning to refer to fully vaccinated and boosted upon eligibility. We are also, consistent with CDC guidelines, moving away from cloth masks. You can see I've upgraded via Amazon to my N95 here. And we are looking forward to federal programs that have been announced over the last couple of weeks to provide free masks, high quality masks for members of the community, and also free tests. The board leadership asked me to take this opportunity, it's now almost 2 years, to reflect a little on how we've managed COVID across the university system. And I think probably what has been most remarkable and successful for us is the level of collaborative leadership, which has been really consensus-based in making all of our decisions. And secondly, the way we have behaved as a system. In general, every important decision has been a system-wide decision on behalf of all 10 of our campuses, but we have tried to provide wherever possible and appropriate for local nuance and control. And I think that has come off extremely effectively, in particular in comparison to some other large organizations. We do have unit level response teams, for example, on our campuses. I also want to comment that when I talk about collaboration, we could not have done what we have done without the active and I believe successful engagement with our unions, in particular HGA and UPA. And I really want to give a lot of credit to beginning with Don Straney, who initiated weekly working groups with UPA at the beginning of this. And that work continues with Erica Lacroix and Jen Govea. That has really enabled us to pivot quickly and successfully as COVID has thrown wrinkles at us. Our leadership team has been very involved. That tends to be our UH officers, and I think you're familiar. That's the vice presidents and the chancellors of West Oahu, UH Hilo, and the provost of UH Manoa. We do have a more inclusive health and well-being working group that includes medical professionals from the university. And I want to give credit to now retired former Dean of Nursing, Mary Bolin, and current Dean of JABSOM, Jairus Hedges, who have provided leadership across our experts from multiple schools, colleges, and campuses. And we also have representation from our governance groups there, both students and faculty. We now have a weekly policy group, so they take input and questions, follow what is changing at the state and national level, the input from our medical and health professionals, and that group comes together and makes recommendations, but decisions are made by the officers, and we meet weekly as the officers. Health and Wellbeing Working Group meets typically every couple of weeks unless needed. Policy Group is meeting weekly. There's enough to be considering. I want to acknowledge Dan Meisenthal, who tracks all of this and helps us with making announcements when appropriate to the 60,000 plus members of our UH community, who we have to keep informed of our policies and practices. He's also the keeper of our guidance documents online and announces when we make changes. And we still have the large group, we affectionately call it the Pres-COVID group. And that's the group that when the pandemic first hit, we just invited anybody who could possibly contribute or who had a stake in it. We were actually meeting daily, 3 times a week, weekly, and now that very large group is mostly engaged by email. So we've been adaptive to how we need to bring together to make this collaborative system-wide leadership approach work for us. I was asked what we have learned, so I'll just highlight a few things. I think we surprised ourselves and everyone around us with just how agile we are. And it turns out we are extraordinarily agile at obviously teaching, learning, research, administration, support services, doing the business of the institution. And I think we've also been pretty agile at decision making. We do discuss things a lot. We're university people, that's kind of inherent, but we have not shied away from making any decision by the time it needed to be made. And that is one of the things we talk about is when do we have to decide something? Because we always know there will be more information tomorrow or next week than there is today. We've made the hard decisions. In many, many cases, we have actually led the way within the state, from being among the first to announce going online, first to announce vaccination requirements, and a number of times when decisions have needed to be made. I will say we hear from those who disagree, sometimes very strenuously, and we listen to the concerns raised and their substance. But we also don't continue to second guess ourselves, even as we listen and have empathy, I think, for those who disagree and are impacted by decisions that don't go the way they would have liked. Our work with our unions, as I mentioned, has been extraordinarily successful. And what I'll say is in conversations with leadership, Randy Pereira, Christian Fern personally engaged when we need them to. And they absolutely want the University of Hawaiʻi to work well just as much as we do, even if we don't always start every conversation at the same place. And lastly, let me mention that I really believe that the test of fire has strengthened our collaboration across the system. As we've learned to work together in difficult times, we can do better with decisions that aren't quite this challenging. Lastly, looking ahead, what do we see for this year and beyond? I'll just say in response to a parent question, and we were talking about this yesterday, the time has stretched and compressed in interesting ways. But as of today, we are planning on real graduations this spring. These will be our first real graduations since 2019 because we lost 2020. We don't know what exactly will happen, but we are not seeing anything that would cause us to begin canceling those large ceremonies at this time. We'll be continuing our return to more in-person teaching in the fall. And I want to emphasize, we will still have courses online. We had many courses and programs online before the pandemic. We will have more courses and programs online after the pandemic, but our decisions will be made with intent for serving students rather than out of necessity for the pandemic. And I think, like most of the healthcare community, we're looking forward to COVID-19 becoming endemic rather than pandemic. Our current thinking is by 2023. So that's sort of how we're looking at it. We don't think it will be totally gone or that we'll be ignoring it this calendar year. And I do want to mention one of the most favorable things for us that we don't think about much, but we appreciate when we do, is that substantial federal funds were made available for higher education for all 10 of our campuses. And these funds were awarded directly to each of our 10 campuses through those 3 tranches in each of 3 relief acts. Those funds have been invaluable. They have covered all of our out-of-pocket expenses associated with COVID. They have provided for millions and millions of dollars in student aid as our students needed help the most, including our debt forgiveness program before fall 21. And those funds have helped us and continue to help us with a substantial portion of the lost revenue. We would be in much sorrier condition without that amazing federal support throughout really 2021. Next, I want to comment a little about on the House Mauna Kea Working Group report. It was referred to in some of the testimony as well. I will acknowledge that, as I've mentioned before, under the terms of a House resolution, the Speaker appointed a working group to come up with a recommendation for an alternative form of management of Mauna Kea that would not have the university continuing in that role. Working group, I believe, has completed its work. The next step will be the preparation of legislation, certainly within the House, to implement that report in some fashion. We provided testimony based on the draft report in opposition, and we will now await the legislation as that becomes introduced, and we expect to actively participate throughout the legislative process. We do not know what the outcome will be, It would have to pass the House. It would have to pass the Senate. It would have to be signed or allowed to be enacted without signature by the governor for it to have effect. And within the university, we aren't sure what will happen, but what we understand is that right now, this responsibility is ours to effectively and thoughtfully and carefully fulfill our responsibilities under the current lease. We intend to continue to do everything we can to improve until and unless that responsibility is removed from us. And that's how we are approaching this with all of our planning, including the preparation of a master plan. A quick update on legislative inquiries, and I want to acknowledge that Calvert will be giving a report on the more formal action. I'm just going to comment on what has become a relatively permanent pattern over the past months of having requests for information and or hearings / briefings called by, in particular, Senate committees about the university. The most recent inquiries have been about telework in general. We, I believe, implemented the first online telework approval process. We baked it into our online sick leave and vacation leave online approval process. So we provided information on every UH employee that had been approved for COVID teleworking over the past 6 months. And we also have inquiries about employees who may be working out of state. We did our best to provide information on every University of Hawaiʻi employee who was working out of state for at least 1 month at any time in the past 4 years. And we've had one follow-up inquiry on that as well. On these 2 points, and this came up also in our recent Senate budget hearing with the Higher Education Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. One of the lessons of this pandemic is that people can work effectively from places other than their offices. This is generically in the literature for higher education and society as if you Google future of work, you'll see what institutions are learning about workplaces and when they're important, when they're not so important. UH is committed to understanding and embracing this as a lesson coming out of this pandemic. I will also say, I believe I mentioned a couple months ago, UH was recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the best employers in the state of Hawaii. We're gratified, if surprised by this, but we do believe that embracing telework for our employees is also part of continuing to be a responsive employer in the post-COVID environment. In particular, Vice Presidents Govea and LaCroix have worked with our unions, and we now, and I believe we are the first part of the public sector in Hawaii to have new telework policies that are not based on COVID. That was done on an emergency basis. Now we're trying to be thoughtful about the future. Again, UPA and HGA have come to agreement with us. Again, we absolutely did not start at the same place at the beginning, but both they and we believe that it is appropriate for us all to begin to understand how to utilize telework moving forward. And finally, in terms of legislative inquiries, we had an extremely difficult, I guess it was called an informational briefing on football that roamed into other areas of athletics. That was just last week. I won't say much, but I'll defer to the forthcoming discussion on the agenda today on that one. Next, quick comment on SCR 201. That's the Senate concurrent resolution that asked us to look at a number of issues related to faculty and tenure. This was unique in that it asked the president of the university and the president of UPA to convene a task force that would be chaired by the chair of the UH Board of Regents. I will just say your chair did an amazing job, and I think UPA would acknowledge that as well. We worked together collegially. We put out a draft. We have processed the feedback. The group has completed its work together, and we are now finalizing it really just stylistically for submittal and public posting early next week. As discussed at the Board of Regents meeting previously, the board will then have both the tenure pig report and the SCR 201 report available together to determine its next steps, including how the board might want to direct the administration to move forward to implement recommendations from either or both of those documents. And I believe in discussions with the chair that the intent is to bring both of those to the full board next month. So a quick update on numbers, and let me start with philanthropy. Yesterday was, of course, an amazing day for the University of Hawaiʻi. That was the announcement of $50 million over 7 years from Dr. Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg is the largest cash gift in our history. It represents an incredible collaboration between the UH Foundation and the University of Hawaiʻi. Those of you who have been on the board for a while will remember that we updated our MOU between the two organizations. We've changed some of the engagement of each other, including naming the new CEO of the UH Foundation as a UH Vice President, who participates fully in all of our officers' meetings. I now participate as UH President as a full voting member on the UH Foundation Board, including in executive sessions. That's all new. But even more importantly, we're partnering together much better than ever before. And I really want to thank Vice President Dolan for that leadership within the foundation. And frankly, your Board of Regents PIG, which was probably 3 or 4 years ago, that really drove the changes in the MOU between us that have enabled some of this. It's a great demonstration of how we can work together. The foundation really did the outreach to understand what would be the interests of this donor with obviously exceptionally large capacity. And once understanding that they were interested in the health of oceans, we mobilized our truly amazing researchers to be responsive to it, to prepare a proposal that was accepted remarkably quickly and that we have just been able to announce yesterday. The timing couldn't be better. Our new director of the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, who leads our programs at Moku'olo'e or Coconut Island, which is where a lot of the work, not all of it, but a lot of the work will take place. Our new director, Eleanor Sterling, just started the first week of January. So pretty good place to arrive, I'll say, to a $50 million gift. We are now at $125 million in philanthropy. It is very clear we will have our best year ever by the time we close out, and you'll get regular reports from Vice President Dolan and or myself. On enrollment, we're still pre-census. That is the official close date. As of today, our spring headcount enrollment is down 2.2% from last spring, same day. So we're a little disappointed because we were just a little bit up in the fall. But at this point, it does not look like we're fully holding. Again, when we lose students, it's for different reasons. Sometimes pandemic, sometimes they graduate. Manoa is up right now 4.2%. Windward Community College is up 2.2%. These are 2 of the 4 campuses that did have increases in the fall. And as Vice President LaCroix has noted previously, of greatest concern are the relatively large declines at our neighbor island community colleges this spring, which we also saw last fall. And she and her team are doing a lot of work to understand and ameliorate that, but also emphasizing, as I've mentioned, non-credit workforce development programs and retraining programs that are not funded with tuition, but other sources. Our extramural funding numbers as of this morning were just over 321 million. That's up about 3% from last year, same day. UH Manoa is currently leading the way, which is normal. That is our flagship research university with over 228 million of that. And UH Manoa, as the bellwether right now, is up over 10% as compared to last year, same day. Vice President Sirmo sees some awards that we would typically get by this time that have come a little more slowly. So at this point, no guarantees, but all signs are positive that not only will philanthropy hit a UH record this year, but so will extramural funding. We have noted this is an extremely long agenda, so I think I'm going to take a pass on any other announcements. Please watch the news releases. I know you all get them by email, and the excellent weekly summaries that come out of Dan Meisensal's office that really highlight all of the wonderful things happening around UH.